The What If I Told You a band got signed because they sounded exactly like AC/DC and then got buried by the record label for sounding too much like AC/DC. They delivered the one hit that could have launched them into arenas. The label barely lifted a finger. They were told their album sounded like a demo even after it was produced by a legend. Here's how Dirty Looks got the deal, delivered the goods, and were left for dead by the very people who were supposed to make them stars.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
So picture this. It's the mid-'80s. Hair metal's blowing up. Every label's scrambling to find the next Motley Crue or Bon Jovi. But there's another sound still kicking around. That raw, stripped-down, beer-soaked rock and roll. The kind that AC/DC had perfected. And in Eerie, Pennsylvania, of all places, there's this Danish-born guitarist and singer named Henrik Ostergaard. And he's got this voice, not just similar to Bon Scott's, at times dead on, uncanny. He and his band, Dirty Looks, are tearing up the local club scene, playing a brand of rock that's loud, simple, and unapologetically blue-collar. The local scene in Eerie was tight but fiercely competitive, with bands vying for attention in dingy bars. Henrik's voice wasn't just about the sound, it carried the soul of a struggling working-class kid trying to make it big. They were not trying to be pretty. No makeup or spandex. They were just plugging in and letting it rip. And the band had been grinding for years. They put out a few independent records, trying to get anybody to notice. Pressed a few hundred copies, sell them at shows, hope for the best. The lineup was a revolving door, with Henrik being the one constant. He was the engine or the songwriter, the guy with the vision. And that vision was simple. Play no-frills, high-energy rock music. They got a little bit of local buzz, enough to get them gigs opening for bands like Quiet Riot and Rat, but they're still a world away from the big time. They're driving around in a beat-up van, sleeping on floors, living off of whatever cash they made at the door. And then a demo tape makes its way to Atlantic Records. This is the big league, the label of Led Zeppelin and AC/DC themselves. An A&R guy named Jason Flom gets a hold of it. Here's something. Flom was obsessed with finding authentic rock acts that could challenge the glam metal wave, and Dirty Looks had that genuine fire. He hears that voice, crunchy, straightforward riffs. He hears dollar signs, a band that can fill a very specific niche, an American AC/DC. It was a formula that seemed foolproof. The real AC/DC hadn't released an album in a couple years at that point, and their last one, Fly on the Wall, hadn't exactly set the world on fire. So there's a bit of a void in the market. Flom believed that Dirty Looks could fill that void, so they get the call. Atlantic Records wants to sign them. For a bar band from Eerie, this is like winning the lottery. Big friggin' dream. So they're flown to New York, put up in hotels, told they're going to make a real record. The budget is huge, at least compared to what they were used to. And they're given a producer, Max Norman. This wasn't just some local studio guy. This is the man who engineered Ozzy Osbourne's most iconic solo albums, Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, worked with Y&T and Loudness, and he knew how to make a rock record sound enormous. It seemed like all the pieces were falling into place. The band, Henrik, guitarist Paul Liddell, bassist Jack Pyers, drummer Gene Barnett, went in the studio with sky-high hopes. And they started recording the album that would become Cool from the Wire. And the songs were already there. Henrik had been writing them for years. Tunes like Oh Ruby, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, and the title track were raw, catchy, and packed with attitude. The band's chemistry in the studio was electric, feeding off of Max Norman's legendary status to fuel their best performances yet. Max's job was to polish them just enough for radio, but without letting them lose their grit, and he did just that. The final product was a monster. The guitars were huge and crunchy. The drums pounded. Henrik's voice was front and center, snarling and wailing like a man possessed. And the album was done, and the band thought that they had a masterpiece on their hands. They delivered exactly what the label wanted, a slick, powerful, American-made AC/DC record. And this is where the story should have taken off. But instead, it started to unravel. The album gets turned into Atlantic, and the reaction is lukewarm. According to the band, the label executives were not too impressed. One of the stories that had circulated for years is that a higher-up at Atlantic listened to the finished, Max Norman-produced album and said something to the effect of, "It sounds like a fucking demo." A demo. An album made by a legendary producer with a big budget was dismissed as sounding unfinished. And the band was floored. This was their shot, and the people who held their future in their hands seemed completely uninterested at all. And despite the label's apparent lack of enthusiasm, they decided to release the album in 1988. But a release without promotion is like whispering into a hurricane. No marketing push, no major ad campaign. They got a video for the lead single, Oh Ruby. It was solid, straightforward performance video. Got played on MTV's Headbangers Ball, the late night show that was crucial for any hard rock band at the time, and something funny happened. People liked it. The song started to get some traction. It was catchy, mid-tempo rocker with a great hook. Had that familiar, comfortable sound but with a fresh energy. And so it began climbing the charts, eventually cracking the Billboard Top 50. And for a new band with almost zero label support, this was a huge achievement. It was happening. Fans were finding them, even if their own label couldn't give a crap. The album, Cool from the Wire, started selling. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was definitely respectable. Hung around the Billboard 200 chart for months, eventually selling around 200,000 copies. This was proof that the band was not crazy, the music was good, and fans did want it. This was the moment for the label to step in and pour gasoline on the fire. This was the time to push their second single, to fund a proper tour, get them on the radio. This was the time actually to cash in on their investment. And Atlantic did absolutely jack shit. They sat on their hands. The momentum from Oh Ruby started to fade. There was no follow-up video. No major radio push for another song like Cool from the Wire or Can't Take My Eyes Off You. The band was sent out on tour, but they were mostly opening for other acts. They played shows with the Dead Daisies and Britney Fox. Good gigs, but not the kind of tour that would break them into the mainstream. But the band toured relentlessly, playing every venue that was willing to have them, even when their spirits were crushed by the label's indifference. They felt like they were being set up to fail. They had a charting single, a selling album, and a growing fan base, and their label was treating them like a tax write-off. The frustration was immense. Paul Liddell, the guitarist, had talked about how they'd be on the road, hearing the song on the radio in different cities, and they couldn't understand why the label was not getting behind them. It felt like deliberate sabotage. Why would a label sign a band, pay for a big-name producer, and then abandon them the second they started to succeed? And the theories flew. Was it because they weren't a hair band? They didn't have the photogenic MTV-friendly look of Bon Jovi or Poison? Just four regular guys playing rock and roll. Was it internal politics at the label? Did their A&R guy lose a power struggle, leaving the band as orphans? One of the most persistent theories goes back to the AC/DC comparison. Maybe it was too on the nose. AC/DC was also on Atlantic Records, so perhaps the label got cold feet about promoting a band that sounded too much like one of their flagship artists, possibly worried that it would dilute the AC/DC brand. Or worse, AC/DC's camp complained. It was all speculation, but for the guys at Dirty Looks, it felt really personal. They had held up their end of the bargain, delivered the album that they were hard to make, and in return, they got the cold shoulder. So after the tour for Cool from the Wire fizzled out, the band was in a tough spot. They're more well-known, but they're also broke and demoralized. Atlantic, surprisingly, did not drop them. They still had a contract, so they went back in the studio to make a follow-up album, Turn of the Screw, released in 1989. This time they worked with another big-name producer, John Jansen, who had worked with Meatloaf and Billy Squier. The album, another solid slab of hard rock. Even featured a guest appearance from Bon Jovi's keyboardist, David Bryan. The lead single, Nobody Rides for Free, got a video and a bit of airplay, but the magic was gone. That momentum was lost. The album sold a fraction of what Cool from the Wire had, and the tour was even less successful. The writing was on the wall. The relationship with Atlantic was completely broken. The band felt neglected and betrayed. The label saw a band that failed to capitalize on its initial success. They were eventually dropped. Just like that, the dream was over. They're back to where they started, only now they were jaded and in debt. The classic lineup fell apart. Paul Liddell and Jack Pyers left, and it was just Henrik left there to pick up the pieces. But Henrik was a fighter. He refused to let that dream die, so he put together a new version of the band and kept going. He signed with a smaller label, Rock World, and they released the album 5 Easy Pieces in '92. And it was a pretty good, raw, pissed-off record. You could hear the frustration in the music. But by then, the musical landscape had changed. Good old grunge took over. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains were the new kings of rock, and bands like Dirty Looks were seen as dinosaurs. And the album went nowhere. But through the rest of the '90s and into the 2000s, Henrik kept the Dirty Looks name alive. He was the only original member left. He moved back to Pennsylvania and would periodically put together a new lineup, record an album on an indie label, play some club dates. The albums, Chewing on the Bit, One Bad Leg, Slave to the Machine, were all solid rock records, full of the same energy and attitude as the early stuff. He never changed that sound, never tried to chase trends. He just kept playing the music that he loved, never losing that passion for that honest rock and roll, even when it seemed the world had stopped listening. But the audience was shrinking. He was playing the smaller and smaller crowds, a ghost of the 80s rock scene, a what could have been story in the flesh. There was a brief moment of hope in 2007. An Italian rock label, Paris Records, reissued Cool from the Wire and signed Henrik to a new album, put together another version of the band, and released Gasoline. There was even talk of a European tour. It seemed like he might finally get some recognition, at least from the die-hard fans who had stuck with him, but it was not to be. In early 2011, the story came to a tragic end. Henrik Ostergaard was found dead in his home in Eerie. He was only 47 years old. The official cause? Liver failure brought on by years of alcohol abuse. His friends had said that he'd become increasingly reclusive and despondent in his final years. A man who would chase the rock and roll dream his entire life, who comes so close to grabbing that brass ring, died alone and largely forgotten by the industry that had once promised him the world. He had the voice, the songs, had one album that should have made him a star, but it wasn't enough. In the end, the business chewed him up and spit him out, leaving behind this cautionary tale and one hell of a rock record that still sounds as electrifying today as it did back in '88. He was the guy who delivered the goods, only to have the door slammed in his face, unfortunately. To my subscribers, thank you so much. You freaking rock. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that sub button. While you're at it, hit the like button. And you know what? Hype the living shit out of this video too. I do appreciate it, and thank you so much for watching.